All right, hello world, welcome back to Mewbs' Musings. It has been so long, and I don't think you can see it. Okay, if I position it like that, look at how cool the shot is. You can see over here this little cinematic wheel that I've made. It's not a wheel. I don't know what to call it. It's one of those mines though that instead of going like burrowing into the wall, and instead is like into the ground. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but oh my gosh, it has been ages since I have been at least recording on this server. And I've got to say, a lot has changed. I don't think I'm going to showcase all of it, but this farm is something I recently built because the new project that I want to make is going to replace a little one that used to be here. It was just a small and humble little bee farm. Sorry. All of the contents of the farm were able to fit in this chest, and maybe even a single chest, I think, if you don't include all the bees. But this new farm is going to be massive, and I have done the heavy work of collecting all of it. It is so tedious collecting stuff in Minecraft, I realize, when you're having to go and collect, like, 2 banners, 5 mossy stone brick stairs, 2 different lantern varieties of a bunch of different types of lanterns. It was a drag, but alas, I have done it. And so here you can see in the top right, as I walk around, it has schematic and it tells me what different blocks are supposed to be placed. If I M and C, and then I do it one more time, you can see that this first floor has a bunch of different blocks, which I actually haven't seen with the shaders before. It's like kind of blurring. It's weird, but if I mine it, oh, that's like still blurry. That's so bizarre. Oh, and I'm in a hole. But yeah, I have a schematic here, and if you don't know what a schematic is, essentially if I press that, you can see that this going into free cam is what I'm going to build. I don't want to spoil it too much, so we're just going to leave it at that. So in essence, I've already built this before on a different server, which I will go to in a second, but I've built it in creative mode, and what I need to do now is using these resources and these chests that I have collected, essentially move it onto this server, and it'll give me a sort of guide to do it block by block. And whop, so here we are, and this is the build, and it is an extremely detailed build. This is probably the most intense sort of artistic build that I've done in a while, and I really want to talk about a bunch of different approaches that I had to do for this build. I think it makes sense though to do the time-lapse first because it's something that I think is a lot more attractive to watch as a viewer, and it's honestly more enjoyable to do as an editor. So if I understand how I'm going to edit this correctly, we can start the time-lapse now. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that time lapse. I really wanted to talk a lot about how I built this because I am really proud of the build. This is the first build I'd say is like 100% original by me. I didn't take like inspiration from other places. I know people are going to argue like, oh, everything is unoriginal and creativity is false because you always derive things from other things you've seen before. I don't particularly think that that's useful as a tool. I mean, just saying creativity doesn't exist in that it's false means that like, okay, so you never get use out of the word creative, but then we still all know what we mean by creative. So if you don't recognize it, this is the testing world. I've done a lot here since then, but this is from Musings 5. I actually had an older iteration of the bee farm here, which I think looks more honey, you know, hive type thing, but ultimately what I'm aiming for is for someone to look at my builds and say, wow, that's a work of art. So the first step was obviously making a bee farm, and so I was just messing around with comparators, redstone, to try and understand what different levels would be red, and you can see with like the texture pack that 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, that all of these hives have a different level, and basically it means that when it hits 5 out of 5, only then do I want it to give an output to say like, hey, either take the honey out or take the honeycomb out. And so eventually I made this design, and so it's pretty simple. It's just whenever this gets an output of 5 or larger, and we use this lectern to say I want a power of 4 here, the comparator compares from this output that it's reading with the number 4, so that it's only when this 5 is larger than 4 does it output. It outputs a signal here, which will then output a signal here, making this get used. So it'll say, hey, there's 5 honey in here. That's more than this 4. So we'll use this bottle to take the honey out. This hive will automatically collect it and then sort it into whatever barrel I want. And over here, I did a bunch of modules all together to try and get a sort of interior of what I wanted the vibe of the build to be like. One important thing to note is that in order for honey in Minecraft to actually accumulate, you need to have bees, and those bees need to have access to flowers. So in my head, I wanted to make a little area that was designated just for bees, so that whenever the bees get pollen, take that pollen, go back to the hive, and then they have honey, so that the bees aren't going to go wandering off, but they also aren't just held in like absolute captivity, like a 1x1 area. I feel like this is the sort of vibe I want to go for farms, where it's a mixture of like functional and still works pretty well, but also is like more akin to what I would see in real life, or if someone were actually in Minecraft, the type of farms that they'd probably want to design. But yeah, this was the first thing I did. I figured out the redstone, and then I did an Ethos lab, if you don't know the YouTuber Ethos lab sort of style, where we go for the interior first, and then we build outward. And so this entire build started with these blocks. I'm not kidding. I just knew that I wanted to do something with like the colors, but with a little bit more variety, so that it's not just yellow or yellow and orange, but I wanted to include the red so that we could get a little bit more of a gradient and have separate sectors. From there, I was just trying to get a little mini mock style thing. You can tell with like the stairs here that originally this roof was going to be sort of like concave. There was going to be a sort of pedestal to hold it up, and then I always wanted this section on top to be supported by some sort of beams or just pillars of support. And so here you can see what ended up being like closer to the final version, where in simple terms, there's going to be one sector on the ground and then one sector up here, and they're sort of like colliding midair, and then the midair one is also being held up by those pillars. And then for the roof, it was going to be just 2 separate flat pieces that had this dark perimeter and then a lighter interior. And I also knew going into this that I wanted it to kind of have the feeling of like a storage silo, so I wanted it to be cylindrical. From there, this is my first iteration where this is it. Like this entire build there started out as just 2 ovals. There was this oval because I was just getting like an idea of how tall I wanted it to be. And then this oval, which I ended up adding walls to it. And so you can see with the shadows, this is more akin to how it originally was. And so that brings me to this stretch. You can see here, like it started out with stripes. And so to get the color palette, you can see this sort of like fireball looking thing that I really enjoy doing. One of my favorite things I've done in Minecraft. But the first thing I did was I just picked out every single red and orange and yellow block I could find in the creative mode. So I literally was just going through like, okay, that's orange, 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 red. But I took that and I literally just I created like a flat area and I just wanted to work on making gradients. I didn't mean for it to be a fireball. It sort of just ended up happening when I was getting like this initial one as a circle, and I was just trying to move in a specific direction, and it was the colors themselves where it was like, oh, I don't have very much dark color over here. Maybe I'll add like a little bit of like an outline. And then in the middle, you can see that like there's a sort of big divide between the red and the orange. And then here, especially from like the orange to the yellow. And then when I got up here, I felt like the yellow wasn't coming out as cool for being like a smooth transition as the orange was for this middle sector. And so I decided to try and play with like yellow over here. It kind of reminds me of one of those like worms on a string for like the shape of it. Like this is like the end, and then this is like where there'd be a string that you yank around. I wasn't going for it. I think it just so happens that I really love curves because I was trying to keep in mind like what interesting shapes would be, and that's how you end up with like this sort of branch off curve. And I think fire just in general has a really nice curve. And so that's how this ended up becoming its own sort of build. But again, this was purely for practice to get the block palette. And so I decided to take different sections of blocks that I really liked. And this I am a huge fan of doing, where you just make a gradient going from like the top to the bottom, or bottom to top, I guess it doesn't really matter, of picking out different blocks that you'd like to work with. But in short, this is like a really helpful tool for just understanding for a building wall how the different colors can transition into one another. And then here you can see that I really did that for the roof as well, and I included these little barriers just so that I could give myself an idea of what it would actually look like. And as I was working with that, I almost feel like I imagined a brand new way of working in Minecraft, which was really cool. So let's fill this with mud. So I just started with like a really dark color, and then I imagined I was painting. And I want you to bear with me because I may not be able to communicate this as powerfully as I wish I could, but in essence, I took like just a stroke, so we can like do a stroke. I think that's too far of a stroke, but just imagine that I'm like painting a stroke that's kind of like a curve, and then I want it to have like a sort of sharper curve upwards, so we'll do maybe like 2 blocks like that. And so I started with like my lightest color, and then from there I kind of just worked on it as if I was mixing the colors like paint. So here you can help start getting the curve from there. It's not as smooth as I'd like it to be, but I think that's fine. For that, let's replace that again. And then just to like fill this in, I'll do like another sort of like splash. I really like that curve. Now I want to work on the darker sections. So here I have a little, dollop of paint that I want to put down before actually getting that dollop of brown, is finish with like a sort of perimeter of, what is this, jungle wood? No, strip spruce. So now we have like our lighter stroke with a border on it, and then we add our little splotches of brown, and we use this like in-between color to finally like just sort of surround kind of like the inverse of the stroke. Here we could probably mix it. We'll do like 1 of the dark. And I want to make sure that like this really dark color doesn't like end up in like the middle here. So I think diagonal corners for this smaller canvas I'm working on is going to be the extent that I allow. And I think with this, we could probably make this splotch a lighter color as well. And then you can see here that there are parts where I deviated, where I would add like dark inside of the light so that it didn't feel like it was just like paths on the roof. I wanted it to feel not quite like this, where it's like a path in a swamp, but instead just like a sort of smeared paint canvas where you end up with like drops that didn't mix, but instead just landed on top and then dried like that. And so to replicate that here, it could be, you know, something as simple as like adding 2 of those inside. I did a little bit more effort with like mixing, and I'm not going to replicate all of that right now. I think I'll actually just leave those as B, because I do really like this idea for like pathing as well, and I might try and implement this for like different paths in the future. So from there, I had the roof. I eventually ended up getting the walls, and then I wish I had a little bit more iteration, but here you can see I started working on detailing, just using different ideas from other builds I've done on the server. Also, I do have like a bunch of the interior done, but I'm going to save that for the other server when I'm actually touring it there. But for here, I just tried to maintain the gradient as best I could, which is why you get windows like this. It's because I had the yellow line going up, and then you can see it like goes down all the way down here and then back up again on like the outskirts of it. We have some windows that like peek through and tell you like, oh, there is a bit of an interior. And from the inside, it also looks a lot more interesting. I really like how this window came out, and it wouldn't have been possible without the shells, which were just added to the game. And then here, it goes from like this darker color to show that it has a bunch of weight being pressed on top of it and that this building has been there for a little while. And I think, yeah, in this one, we also have like some plants to show that vegetation has started like crawling up it. And then over here, we have these sort of iterations where it's not on the chain ones as much, though you have it here, but you have like little divots going into the ground surrounded by the, not the polished deep slate wall, but the chiseled tough bricks to show that this is a specific support column that all of this weight is pushing towards into the ground. And then from there, I just took a bunch of inspiration from like a bunch of random real life photos to see like what would look good for like getting different solar panels up and whatever these like HVAC specific things are that I definitely know the name of. The more detailed, the better, I think. I think that's basically everything I wanted to talk about for the build itself though. So I have been working a lot tonight. This is like, you know, a little bit behind the scenes. I need to go actually build this in the actual server, so I still haven't done that yet. I wanted to do all my explanations for the thought process first, so I need to go do that. So I'm going to leave you for now, and I will come back on another day to finish exploring the interior. Phew. I don't know if that'll be a transition. Maybe I'll just make an abrupt cut. And we're back. So I decided to go with an abrupt cut, as you could tell. I wish I had more to say about this, but I guess the very first thing we can do is actually show you the interior that I have been teasing. So I got it up and running, and this didn't end up turning out exactly how I wanted it to. I wanted to actually have a little gap here for the bees to fly like in and out. I did get rid of the trapdoors. I just kept getting bees that would go to like these flowers and stuff, and maybe I'll give it another try because this is how the build was originally meant to be. I decided to add the glass because, like I said, the bees kept getting stuck. But I really don't like this glass, so we're gonna see if the bees can somehow survive. And it looks like it should be nighttime. Yeah, turning off time changer. Ah, man, this is just beautiful. It's so beautiful. I actually haven't looked at the farm at night. You can actually see like a lot of mobs spawning in the dark there. And yep, I was worried about that. There are mobs spawning on the roof. One project I want to make is near spawn. I want to make a mob switch, which basically you get a bunch of volatile mobs and you trap them all in spawn chunks because spawn chunks never despawn. And those mobs make it so that no other mobs can spawn since there are a mob cap of like 128 mobs or so. But I haven't done that yet, but I still plan to, which is why I didn't add any lighting on the top of the roof. Although I gotta be careful about these creepers and not activating them. Yeah, you can already see though, these bees are sort of getting trapped with whatever this behavior is. Oh, I touched him. And now he's going up. Let's see if they go up. I guess I didn't even really talk about it. I acted like you already saw this, but this is the top, and I love how it came out. Oh, I love getting to see just like parts of the world through windows. Like, look, that's my house, and those are the rainbow beacons. By the way, speaking of the past, gotta get my Red Bull in for the day. This one is Sudachi Lime, and I really have been quite pleasantly surprised that as I've gotten older, even though I still like sweet stuff and like sour stuff, I also really like bitter stuff to be added with it. So I guess as you get older, your palate really does just get less sweet intense and more bitter intense. Is intense a good word for it? I don't know. But it looks like... Oh, I spoke too soon. Look at these bees just having a party. What are you doing, bees? Yeah, I'll leave you to it. And these bees... maybe I shouldn't have taken the glass down. But yeah, I was going for a sort of like oasis feeling, or just something that was like somewhere where you basically wouldn't expect to find a bunch of like plants and greenery. And I wanted it to be almost like a greenhouse feeling. And then here, I really like this touch. This is just where like the bees broke in and they started their own little like hive up here and have a bunch of honey. And I used a bunch of like the resin clumps that I was talking about earlier. Even though they weren't good for gradients, they are really good for reenacting honey. And so I really like this upper corner that looks like it's just a bunch of, you know, bees overtaking the corner. Then we also just have cobwebs and stuff. And something that I really tried to value is not just adding like decoration at like, you know, the ground level or where you'd be walking for this floor, but going like really vertical. So having like these chains all the way up and down being hoisted, these little, you know, platforms that are just adding more decoration for all of the verticality to try and make use of 100% of the space I'm working with. That does take me over to this one, which I'll actually go ahead and do this as I talk about it. This is just like a small cocoa farm. Obviously it's manual, but I think you can tell that I wasn't really going for efficiency with all of this like decoration up here. It means absolutely nothing, although I will say one thing I was really proud of was initially these jungle logs were just set up haphazardly, but I noticed that like every time, yeah, I'll pick up these, every time I was using it, I was getting almost a stack of beans perfectly, and so now with like this button here, that means I can't place any beans here, which tells me it's this side that I need to plant, and so this basically gives me a perfect stack every single time I replant it, which is just... I don't know, a very satisfying touch for me. See, totally out of beans, and then in this shulker, I can just throw that there. I also wanted to show off this iron farm, because this is from Musings 6, the like final level of the iron farm that I was going for. So here, you can see we have Mr. Golem, who is unfortunately perishing, and that is because in here, we have these 3 villagers freaking out from this zombie. So it's a typical iron farm, but what's special about it is all of this decoration out here. It's not just for fun, it's specifically to make sure that the golem has nowhere else to spawn except in the killing chamber. That golem will funnel its iron from there into this little hopper series, into this bubble vader, and then that bubble vader on the outside leads all the way up into this room, which has this minecart with a hopper. And I don't know if this is the best way to like load items from a bubble vader, because if you have an item underneath the bubble vader, it'll go into the hopper minecart, but that hopper minecart needs to be like perfectly positioned in order to also be above another hopper, which then points into this chest. I don't know if it's ideal, but it works, so that's what I'm working with. Same deal over here. But basically, it separates into 2 different functions. So one of them just gives us our roses, and then the other one actually goes into this auto crafter, and that auto crafter just cleanly makes iron blocks. It's not the most efficient farm, but obviously with the intent of this being more of an artistic build, that was what I was going for, where I just want it to be like really, really pretty. And then over here is the vertical mine shaft, which I've done some editing and I looked it up. So I think this is a vertical mine shaft because this just goes down and down and down and down and down and down. And hi, friend. This guy was originally in like the lake up there, but then he ended up down here. And so that's why he's named Waterproof, because apparently magma slimes are freaking waterproof, which who thought the, you know, guy that has magma in the name would be waterproof? Also rude. Stop it. So yeah, going up here, this is just a little storage area for a bunch of concrete powder that I've gotten totally legitimately and without any cheating. And then here you can see I'm still actually in the process of turning concrete powder into concrete. And then in the last one, I just want to eventually have wool for this side. And so this is meant to just be like a big collection for a bunch of chests that have all of my colored blocks. You know, it's kind of cool seeing the reflection, and it like makes like sort of an ovular shape instead of it being like a half dome. It has been a while since I have had shaders on, and I have taken a nice nap in my bed. No, not capital Z's! Always 5 lowercase z's. But going back to the vertical mineshaft, I guess I didn't actually show off the crane. This is just, you know, I feel like these are probably my favorite types of build. I'll go in free cam, where it's just like, look at that. That's just a screenshot. That's beautiful. But it's the sort of thing where like none of it is functional, but it just makes the world feel like way more lived in, if that makes sense. And I want it to get to the point for this world where no matter where you look in like the middle of like the stump here, it just feels like full of life, like everywhere you look. That's my sort of like end goal with this. Oh yeah, one massive project that I didn't even talk about was doing this lake. I replaced the entire like lake bottom with mud, and that is such a tedious process. I did listen to a couple audiobooks while doing it, but it's just, you either have to go out and mine a bunch of mud and replace all of it, or you go out, you get a bunch of dirt and place like all of that dirt, and then you get a bottle and you have that like bottle constantly emptying and filling with water because you're doing it while you're literally in water, and you're just right clicking every single one of these blocks. And I did cheat a little bit. You see that like I got a bit lazy over here, and here you can really see all my scaffolding blocks that I used. I'm looking at my statistics, items used. Yeah, you can see 21,000. So there were 21,000 blocks that I had to right click. And for each of the right clicks, you need to like right click to fill the water, and then right click to place the water on the dirt to turn it into mud. So I had to click 42,000 times, which is just like, what am I doing at that point? I feel like I'm getting closer and closer to where I might honestly make the jump to just playing creative. I don't know if I want to do it for like servers like this where I, you know, have been playing survival for so long that I don't feel like it would be anything except sacrilegious to suddenly make the jump to creative mode. But like this mountain, oop, don't want to die. But talking about this mountain from Musings 4, I don't think that this looks as good as it could. I feel like, especially with like the darker bits of tuff there, it feels very, what is the term? I actually have my opinions in this book right here. It's block vomit. But yeah, I don't really like the idea of block vomit, which, let me get like a better visual for you guys instead of just like this far out sort of view. So this is a creative mode version of the Neotalk server, and you can see here like the lake bed looks a lot different, although it kind of looks cool with shaders, but without shaders it kind of looks like really messy. But yeah, this is what I want to do. Instead of for this section having just like a bunch of block vomit, I want to make these sort of like cracks in the wall, and I feel like this is probably the best example of, especially using like the gray stained glass pane, it's just like adding like shadows and stuff over the top of it to make it feel like it's more of a realistic mountain. And I've been experimenting here. You can see that I replaced here all with stone instead of like the sort of block vomit that was here before. What I want to say right now, even though I'm calling it block vomit, I don't really like calling it block vomit because I feel like this is a totally understandable tool. I feel like it's a great first step for new people who haven't really, you know, learned to do Minecraft building to transition from something like this, where it's like, okay, I have a mountain, I could place stone, but like, what else do I do? It's like introduce block vomit to them. Or I think my friend Neo actually put it best, where rather than calling it block vomit, it's like such a volatile way to talk about it, and it's used in volatile ways for people who are like really into the nitty-gritty of high technical Minecraft building to look down upon others by saying like, oh, you're using block vomit. You know, it has such like a negative aura to it, right? But it's like such a good first step. Like I don't think it looks bad per se. I don't think it looks as good as it could, and I want to level up my own building, which is why I've been experimenting with like these cracks in the mountain instead. But it's still a good first step. It's a fabulous first step, actually, in my opinion, and it's still a valuable tool, like here, just this wall in general. I don't think this looks like vomit. I think this just looks like a textured wall. And so going back to what I was saying, I think Neo was the one that called it like a splatter shot or like splatter paint, because it just kind of looks like you have like let's say here, we'll use cobblestone as an example. You have your blank canvas of a bunch of stone, and then you just replace sort of like a splatter of paint. Like you have a brush and it has paint on it, and you like flick it. It's just splattering paint across the canvas. And that's a totally practical use, and it's not something that I think should be talked about in such a way that we look down upon it. So now that we're back in this world, you can see that like this looks a lot different. And I was actually talking with some friends, and at first they were thinking, oh, you know what, the cracks, yeah, they look kind of good. But then they decided that they actually like this better instead, which is fine. I still really just value my own opinion first and foremost. And more than anything, I want to level up my own game. So that's why I haven't completely done this in this world instead. But like, I just tried to double space as if I was in creative mode. I will say that at this point, I'm starting to question whether or not I want to continue playing in survival, because I think survival really not only, I shouldn't say that, but I think survival is more fun to play when you're playing it with other people. But when you're just playing something for the sake of being creative and you're being held back by survival mode, it made me realize, oh wait, maybe that's why it's called creative mode, because you're meant to be creative in that mode. And I know that that sounds like a dumb realization to have as like a Minecraft veteran who's been playing the game for over a decade at this point, but it's just, I didn't really take it to heart until I was building this. This thing sucked to build. Like, this thing was just like, I've already built this before. Which, like, I feel kind of in a paradox, because the reason I built this was to have a honey farm, and the only reason you would need a honey farm is if you're in survival, because if you're in creative mode, you just have infinite of everything. So it like gives direction, I guess, if you're going the creative mode path, but I don't know. I really feel like survival at this point is just like sort of hindering me from learning to be more creative. So I'd be interested to hear like what your thoughts are about whether or not a world like this, if it's fine to leave it as survival, or if I should be sort of like lenient. Like, I don't even have access. Like, I need to host the world every time I want creative access, because this wasn't my world to begin with. But I just feel like, I don't know, for the goal that I want, I don't know if I really care about it being survival mode, if that makes sense. Like, I mostly just want to make a world where everywhere you look around the lake, there's like something interesting to look at, and it looks like the world is alive. Clearly I am able to make stuff in survival mode. Like, I don't have an issue with it stopping me, but it is preventing me, I feel, from doing a lot more than I could otherwise. I don't know. That's about all I have to say about the subject for whether or not I switch to creative or not. I'm still deciding whether or not I want to, because, like I said, it feels like it would be really sacrilegious to just suddenly switch from this when it's been survival for so long, but it's really tempting, especially after that behemoth of a building over there took so long to complete. Either way, I want to thank you for watching and listening to my musings. I guess I'll say, like, Finn, I live in a new place. I'm still a university student, though. I have the preceptorship. Oh, here comes the boy. He ruined my bit. So I have my dog with me now, and he is like the world's best dog. No, don't lick me. I saw where you were just looking. I don't know, I just wanted to show him off at some point. Yeah, thank you for watching. Here's a fun time lapse of me building this crane, because I've talked about it the entire video. Bye-bye!